Well, despite what you may hear, there is some bipartisan welcoming of Donald Trump as president, at least on some issues. Kevin Chavis, who is a longtime D.C. councilman here, says that Mr. Trump, for example, is right on track when it comes to school choice. Mr. Chavis joins us now. Thanks a lot for joining us.
It's good to see you, Tucker.
Appreciate it. Now, you're a lifelong Democrat.
Yes.
I don't think you agree with everything Trump says, but you're kind of with him on education. Why?
Well, I believe in school choice, and I'm a great friend of Betsy DeVos. I've worked with her very closely. And look, at the end of the day, we have a real major challenge in education in this country.
Yeah.
Half the kids of color are dropping out, 6,000 kids a day.
Half the kids?
Half the kids of color are dropping out.
Whoa.
And most of our schools are underperforming. In fact, according to the Department of Education, 48% of our public schools are either failing or underperforming. We need to shake things up, and there's no better way to do that than through school choice.
So I have this conversation all the time with other anxious parents. You know, what about the schools? They're terrible, and people always say the same thing, which is they are starved for funding. So I looked up today. Since 1970, there's been a 200% increase to schools, primary education, secondary education, and basically no movement on test scores at all. It's not just about funding.
No, it's not. You know, you mentioned I was on the city council. I was chair of the education committee. We gave D.C. public schools $300 million new dollars over a 3-year period. 10,000 fewer kids they were educating. Outputs went down. It's not about money. It's what you do with the money. And the great thing about school choice, it's a good way to help kids where there's a real need today and also incentivize the system for change. We've seen that in D.C.
Yes.
We've seen it in Florida. We've seen it in New Orleans. We've seen it in Milwaukee. And Betsy DeVos understands that. And look, the only people who are against school choice, Tucker, are the ones that have it.
Well, that's right.
They're the only ones.
But that's exactly right. And if you look at the numbers, I didn't know this either. I was reading about it today. Look at the numbers among black voters. Support for school choice is really high.
70 to 80%. And
so
the same with
the
Hispanics.
NAACP is against it. How does that work?
Well, because they're in lockstep with the union, and they also, the leadership of the African-American community, the leadership of the Hispanic community, a lot of teachers who have kids in private school, they have school choice. But it's the working class Americans.
School choice meaning they send their kids to private school.
They send their kids to private school or to the elite public schools.
Right.
And this is an issue I think that you can unify America. What we really need, and I think Betsy gets this, we need to depoliticize it, you know, which is what the union has been doing, and build this national consensus around learning that promotes what's best for children.
Interesting. So how school choice has been applied in a couple of different cities, including Washington and New Orleans. I mean, it's been a while. What are the results?
It's terrific. First of all, in our D.C. Opportunity Scholarship Program, we've had 6,000 kids go through this program. That's that federal voucher program that Betsy helped support. And 90% of those kids graduate. 90% have gone to college. They come from schools where over half the kids drop out. So, you know, that's an amazing turnaround. 6,000 lives that otherwise would have been changed if they hadn't got that opportunity. And we've seen this with our charter school movement. Over almost half the kids in D.C. public schools are in charter schools.
Right. And
Kai Henderson, the outgoing chancellor, she says that helped incentivize change in D.C. public schools so that they have increased enrollment for the first time in years. In Florida, the same thing. 100,000 kids in a tax scholarship program there, and studies have shown that the kids who were left behind do better. So this is a way to lift all boats.
Interesting. So in Washington, a woman called Michelle Rhee was hired by the mayor to come in and implement a lot of pretty heavy-duty education reform. And a lot of the residents of Washington resented it. And my read was some of them saw the schools, in addition to places to educate their kids, as a jobs program. And she was paring back unemployment, and they resented it, and they threw the mayor out as a result. What's a better way to do that?
Well, they didn't resent the idea, they resented the approach. I mean, the problem that Mayor Fenty had, and you know, we talked about this, he worked for me, and Michelle Rhee, you got to hug people while you change them. And you can't ram it down people's throat. And I think that's one really exciting thing about Betsy DeVos's leadership. I've worked with her around the country. She's a consensus builder. She's going to be a star in this cabinet because she believes in reaching across the aisle and working with Democrats and building consensus around collaborative ideas that help kids. And that's the problem when people try to ram school choice or ram these proposals, similar to Common Core, down the throat of people who aren't ready for it. And that flies in the face of Betsy's style, and it's going to make a big difference. People want school choice, but you have to have them understand how it works, have them have peer-to-peer conversations, and then give examples, lift up the models that work.
So my final question is, you always hear the same response when you talk about school choice with someone from the union or an opponent of school choice, which is if people are allowed to leave bad public schools will collapse. and it takes resources from the public system and sends them to private companies. What's the response to that?
It's absolutely not the case. What we want to do is make our public schools work for our kids. I envision America where all kids have equal access to a quality education. And the best way to do that is the short-term remedy of getting kids in good schools today, particularly those who come from bad schools. And also it helps lift all boats because, as we've seen in D.C. and Florida and other places, when the public schools see that there's a real threat to their monopolistic existence,
that's right,
they respond.
Boy, have they. Kevin Chavis, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks,
that was
Tucker.
super interesting.